So, let's go. Your brain doesn't go dark when you die. It might light up brighter than it ever has while you were alive. And that's the least disturbing thing in this video. Number 8, the dying brain's final surge. Here's what everyone assumes. Your heart stops, blood stops flowing, your brain loses oxygen and shuts down like a light switch. Dark. Done. Gone. That's wrong. In 2023, a team at the University of Michigan strapped EEG monitors to 4 dying patients right before life support was withdrawn. They watched the brain activity second by second as these people died. 2 of the 4 patients did exactly what you'd expect. Brainwaves slowed down, flatlined, quiet ending. The other 2 did something nobody can explain. The moment their hearts stopped, their brains exploded with activity. Gamma waves, the fastest brain waves we know of, the ones linked to conscious thought, memory, and focused attention, spiked to 300 times their previous levels. Not a little bump. 300 times. That's higher than a normal waking brain, higher than yours is right now. And it wasn't random noise. The activity was concentrated in a specific region called the posterior hot zone, a spot at the back of the brain where the temporal, parietal, and occipital lobes meet. This is the same area that lights up during dreaming, during out-of-body experiences, during visual hallucinations in epilepsy patients. It's what some neuroscientists call the seat of consciousness. The surge lasted between 30 seconds and 2 minutes. Then it stopped. Then the patients were dead. This wasn't the first time. Back in 2013, the same lead researcher showed that rats' brains produce a 30-second burst of gamma waves after cardiac arrest. In 2022, a completely separate team happened to be monitoring an 87-year-old man's brain when he unexpectedly died of a heart attack. Same pattern. Gamma surge. 30 seconds before and after the heart stopped. Now here's what we don't know. We cannot ask these patients what they experienced. We never will. Gamma waves correlate with consciousness in living people, but correlation is not proof. 2 of the 4 patients showed the surge. Both had a history of seizures. Maybe that's related, maybe it isn't. But if gamma waves mean what they mean in every other context we've ever studied them in, then the moment of death might not be the lights going out. It might be the brightest thing you ever see. Your brain, in its final seconds, producing the most intense conscious experience of your entire life. And you'd never be able to tell anyone about it. Number 7, lucid dying. So the dying brain surges, fine. Maybe it's just neurons misfiring. Maybe it's the biological equivalent of a light bulb flaring before it burns out. Except people come back from this. And they remember things. The largest study of consciousness during cardiac arrest ever conducted followed 567 patients across 25 hospitals in the US and UK. These people were clinically dead, hearts stopped, no blood flow, and then they were brought back. Fewer than 10% survived to leave the hospital. But of those who did, about 40% reported some form of awareness during CPR. 20% described what researchers call a recalled experience of death. Not a dream, not a hallucination, something else. 3% demonstrated something harder to dismiss, verifiable awareness. One patient recalled a specific word that was played through headphones during CPR at a time when their Ardois EEG showed virtually no brain activity. They heard something when, according to everything we know about how brains work, they shouldn't have been able to hear anything. And here's the detail that broke the old model. Doctors used to assume the brain suffers permanent damage about 10 minutes after the heart stops. This study found brain activity returning to normal patterns up to 1 hour into CPR. An hour. The window isn't 10 minutes. It might not even be a window. The leading hypothesis is something called disinhibition. Your brain right now is mostly in the business of stopping itself. Inhibitory systems act like brakes, keeping neural activity controlled and organized. When you die, the brakes come off. Oxygen drops. The inhibitory systems fail first, and the brain, for a brief moment, runs completely unfiltered. What people report during this window is remarkably consistent. Across cultures, across religions, across people who had no prior knowledge of near-death experiences. A feeling of peace so overwhelming it defies description. Separation from the body, watching the room from above. A life review, not like a highlight reel, more like reliving every moment simultaneously and understanding all of it. heightened awareness that survivors describe as realer than real, and occasionally, in a minority of cases, pure terror. These experiences are formally classified as distinct from hallucinations, delusions, dreams, or CPR-induced consciousness. They're structured, they're coherent, and they're consistent in ways that random misfiring neurons shouldn't produce. The lead researcher put it simply, when the brain is severely impaired or non-functional, these reports shouldn't be possible. Yet they are. Now. Everything I've told you in these first two sections is published peer-reviewed science, real EEG data, real patients, real journals. From here, we leave measurement behind and enter theory. The scientists are still real. The institutions are still real. But what comes next is unproven. And it gets strange. Number 6, quantum consciousness. What if consciousness doesn't come from your neurons? What if it comes from something smaller, something weirder, something that physics says can never be destroyed? A Nobel Prize-winning physicist named Roger Penrose and an anesthesiologist named Stuart Hameroff have spent 30 years arguing exactly that. Their theory says consciousness doesn't emerge from the connections between brain cells. It arises from quantum computations happening inside them, in tiny protein structures called microtubules. Microtubules are 25 nanometers wide. Thousands of them are packed inside every neuron. And according to this theory, they contain electrons that become quantum entangled, forming something like a biological quantum computer. Each time these quantum states collapse, you get a moment of conscious experience. Here's where death enters the picture. Quantum information, according to the laws of physics, cannot be destroyed. It can only transform. So if your consciousness is quantum information stored in microtubules, then when your body dies, that information doesn't vanish. It dissipates. Out of your neurons, into the universe, into the fundamental geometry of space-time itself. Hameroff has said it directly. The quantum information can exist outside the body, perhaps indefinitely, as a soul. There is some recent evidence in their favor. A 2024 study found that rats given a drug that specifically binds to microtubules took over a minute longer to lose consciousness under anesthesia. Anesthetics seem to work by disrupting quantum activity in microtubules specifically, which would mean microtubules are doing something related to consciousness. The theory is at least asking the right questions, but the criticism is brutal. Independent experiments show microtubules can sustain quantum states for femtoseconds to picoseconds. The theory needs them to last milliseconds. That's a gap of roughly a millionfold. The philosopher Patricia Churchland called it pixie dust in the synapses. The brain, most physicists maintain, is simply too warm, too wet, and too noisy for quantum coherence to survive. And yet, a Nobel laureate in physics disagrees. And the question the theory raises is one nobody has answered. If consciousness is information, and information cannot be destroyed, then what happens to it when the thing carrying it falls apart? Maybe it scatters, like ripples in a pond that was holding your reflection. The image is gone, but the ripples keep going. Forever. Number 5, biocentrism. Every theory so far has tried to answer what happens to your consciousness when you die. This one says you're asking the wrong question. Death is the illusion, not consciousness. Robert Lanza is not a philosopher. He's a stem cell researcher. Time magazine named him one of the 100 most influential people in the world. His actual day job involves regenerative medicine. But his side project rewrites reality. His theory, biocentrism, makes one core claim. Consciousness doesn't come from the universe. The universe comes from consciousness. Space and time aren't things that exist out there. They're tools your mind uses to organize information like a file system. Delete the file system and the data doesn't disappear. The organizing structure was the illusion. He leans hard on the double-slit experiment. Particles exist as waves of probability until they're observed. Observation collapses the wave into a definite state. If reality only becomes real when something conscious looks at it, then reality needs consciousness to exist. And if reality needs consciousness, consciousness cannot end. I mean, you can't kill the thing that makes the universe real. Death, in biocentrism, is your consciousness shifting to a parallel universe where you survived, you die here, you continue there, and you were never aware of the transition because time itself is part of the illusion. The criticism is just as blunt as the theory is bold. One prominent physicist said it might be interesting philosophy but won't change anything about science. A philosopher at Tufts said it's the opposite of a theory because it doesn't explain how consciousness works, it just declares it fundamental and stops there. Biocentrism doesn't have peer-reviewed physics papers, it has books, it has essays, it has a passionate following, and almost no math. But the question it leaves behind is sticky. If the observer matters in quantum mechanics, and it does, then what happens to reality when all the observers are gone? Number 4. Panpsychism. This one sounds like good news at first, it isn't. What if consciousness is not something brains generate? What if it's a fundamental property of all matter? Like mass. Like charge. Every particle in the universe has some tiny, almost imperceptible flicker of experience. Rocks have it, water has it, photons have it, not thoughts, not feelings. Just the raw, bare capacity for something to be like something. A neuroscientist named Giulio Tononi built a mathematical framework around this idea. It's called integrated information theory. Consciousness in this model equals integrated information measured by a value called phi. Anything with a phi greater than 0 has some degree of consciousness. A photodiode has 1 bit. Your brain has an astronomically high phi because billions of neurons are densely interconnected, feeding information back and forth in loops. Now watch what happens when you die. Your brain was an incredibly complex system that organized unimaginable amounts of integrated information into a single unified experience. Your identity, your memories, your personality. That was the hi-fi system. When the brain dies, phi drops. The integration breaks. The organized experience that was you dissolves. But here's the part that makes this worse than simple death. Under panpsychism, the fundamental capacity for experience was never yours to begin with. It was everywhere. Your brain didn't create consciousness, it organized it, temporarily, into a pattern called you. When you die, the pattern breaks. But the raw material doesn't disappear. It disperses back into reality, formless, without memory, without identity, without a subject. Something persists, but it isn't you. It's experience without anyone having it. Think of it this way. The consciousness in your brain compared to the consciousness in a rock is like the Pacific Ocean compared to a single water molecule. Same fundamental substance. Incomprehensibly different in scale and organization. Death evaporates the ocean. The water molecules remain. This is arguably the most unsettling theory on this list. Not because you die, not because you survive, because you dissolve. Your memories, your identity, everything that made you a person, gone. But some scattered, formless fragment of what it was like to be anything at all continues. Unmoored. You didn't end. You just stopped being organized, and the universe didn't notice. Number 3. Quantum immortality. Okay, what if you literally can't die? In 1957, a physicist named Hugh Everett proposed the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. Every time a quantum event has more than one possible outcome, the universe doesn't pick one. It splits. Both outcomes happen, in separate branches, both equally real. You make a left turn, the universe splits. One version of you went left, one went right. Both exist. Neither knows about the other. Now apply this to death. You're in a car crash. In some branches of the universe, you die. In others, you survive. Here's the thing. You can only ever observe the branches where you're alive. In the branches where you're dead, there's no you to observe anything. So from your perspective, your subjective first-person perspective, you always survive. Always. No matter what. A physicist at MIT formalized this in 1997 with the thought experiment called quantum suicide. Imagine a gun connected to a quantum event, a radioactive atom. If the atom decays, the gun fires. If it doesn't, the gun clicks. 50-50, every time. You pull the trigger 1,000 times. In half the branches, you're dead. But you can't experience those branches. From where you're standing, the gun clicks every single time. 1,000 times in a row. You can never experience your own death. Your consciousness always follows the branch where you survived. Everett himself reportedly believed this. He was convinced the many worlds theory guaranteed his immortality. And here's where it gets haunting. His daughter Liz took her own life in 1996. In her suicide note, she wrote that she was going to a parallel universe to be with her father, who had died in 1982. The philosopher David Lewis at Princeton explored this idea in a 2001 lecture. It was his first foray into quantum mechanics. He died less than 4 months later. Now, most physicists reject this. The creator of the thought experiment himself walked it back. Only 18% of physicists surveyed even support the many worlds interpretation. Dying isn't a clean binary, alive or dead. There's a continuum of degraded states in between, and the branching logic breaks down there. But the thought experiment reveals something deeply uncomfortable even if it's wrong. If quantum immortality were true, you'd never die. Sounds great until you realize what it actually means. Everyone you love eventually dies, from your perspective. You watch them go one by one while you persist through increasingly improbable chains of survival. A miraculous recovery here. A freak accident avoided there. You get older, more fragile. The survival branches get thinner and thinner. But they never reach zero. Eternal life, eternal grief, and in infinite other branches, everyone you know is watching you die right now while they continue without you. Now, everything up to this point has asked the same question in different ways. What happens to your consciousness when you die? The last two theories don't ask that question. They ask something worse. They ask whether you were ever real in the first place. Number 2, the simulation hypothesis. In 2003, a philosopher at Oxford published a paper with a simple argument. If advanced civilizations can run simulations with conscious beings inside them, they'd run billions. The number of simulated minds would vastly outnumber real biological minds. Statistically, any given conscious being, including you, is almost certainly simulated. If that's true, death isn't biological, it's computational. And it has nothing to do with you. Your death could be data archival. Your consciousness pattern saved, compressed, shelved. It could be a respawn, memory wiped, new parameters, new environment. It could be process termination, a clean delete, no afterlife, no data. Just a freed up thread on a server you'll never see. And here's the thought that actually keeps people up at night. Religious afterlife concepts suddenly make technological sense. Heaven and hell aren't supernatural. They're controlled simulation environments designed for reward or punishment. Reincarnation is a memory-wiped reboot with modified variables. Purgatory is a processing queue. Judgment Day is a performance review run by an algorithm. Your death might serve a function, not for you, for the simulation. Narrative design, resource management. A variable in an experiment running on a scale you can't comprehend. You didn't die because your body failed. You died because something running the program decided your thread was done. The strongest criticism is also the simplest. The whole argument depends on the assumption that consciousness can run on silicon, not just carbon. Nobody has proven that. The philosopher who wrote the original paper puts the probability we're simulated at below 50%. A physicist pointed out you'd need a computer the size of the universe to simulate a universe. But the question isn't whether it's likely. The question is what death means if it's true. And the answer is that death isn't even about you. It's a design choice made by something you'll never meet for reasons you'll never know on a level of reality you can never access. Number 1. Boltzmann brains. This is the last theory, and it doesn't just change what death means, it changes what right now means. In 1896, the physicist Ludwig Boltzmann was trying to explain why the universe has structure at all. The second law of thermodynamics says everything moves toward disorder. Entropy always wins. Given enough time, the universe will reach a state of maximum disorder called heat death. No stars, no planets, no structure, just an infinite featureless void of particles at the same temperature. Forever. But here's the catch. Statistical mechanics says that even in thermal equilibrium, random fluctuations happen. Particles bump into each other in slightly unusual ways. Most of the time, nothing interesting comes of it. But, given infinite time, every possible arrangement of matter will occur, including, eventually, a fully functioning human brain, complete with memories, complete with a sense of self, complete with the absolute conviction that it lived an entire life, had parents, went to school, watched this video. It would exist for a fraction of a nanosecond. Then it would fall apart, back into the void, gone. Modern physicists took this idea and ran the math. A functioning brain is far more likely to spontaneously assemble from random particle collisions than an entire universe that evolves over 13.8 billion years to eventually produce brains through evolution. So if you're looking at the statistics, most observers in an infinite timeline aren't people. They're these momentary brains, flickering in and out of existence in an empty universe. Each one convinced it's real. They're called Boltzmann brains. A philosopher named Christian Leuths pushed this further with something he called Boltzmannian immortality. If statistical mechanics is right and the universe persists long enough, exact duplicates of your brain will form through random fluctuations in the far future. Billions of years after your death, they'll think your thoughts, have your memories, pick up exactly where you left off. Is that you? Is that survival? Or is it just the universe randomly rolling your dice combination again in an eternity of throws? Think about it this way. The odds of shuffling a deck of cards into one specific order are 1 in 8 times 10 to the 67th power. The odds of shuffling atoms into a functioning brain are incomprehensibly worse. But in infinite time, probability becomes certainty. Everything that can happen will happen, including you. Again, and again, and again. And here's the recursive horror that makes this the most disturbing theory on the list. If you're a Boltzmann brain right now, every piece of evidence you could use to disprove it is also part of the hallucination. Your memories are false. The universe you think you see is false. The physics you'd use to reason your way out of this is false. There is no test you can run, no thought you can think that escapes the loop. The physicist Sean Carroll called Boltzmann brains cognitively unstable. They can't simultaneously be true and justifiably believed. Scientists use this as a way to reject any cosmological model that predicts Boltzmann. Brains should dominate, because if your theory says most observers are nanosecond hallucinations in a dead universe, your theory has a problem. But the math allows it, the physics permits it, and nobody has proven it can't happen. So, 8 theories. Each one built on real science, real math, real researchers with real credentials, and every single one of them is built on top of the same unsolved problem. We don't know what consciousness is. We're arguing about what happens to something we can't even define. And until we solve that, the most honest answer to what happens after death is the one science hates the most. We have no idea. But the possibilities are worse than we thought.